Early in the morning, May 24th, 1941, England and Germany were struggling in what would become World War II. The German battleship on its initial foray into the battle, the Bismarck, with the Prince Eugen as its escort, a much smaller ship, headed out to the Atlantic to sink shipping. And at that time, England was supplied mainly by American cargo ships bringing war supplies from the United States. So they're coming out to cause havoc and possibly end the war and cause England to give in. Um, the Bismarck was an amazing battleship, 45,000 tons, and it was a huge shock to the British intelligence to learn that it was built, that it existed, and that it was heading out. So to meet it, they sent their largest battleship, the largest battleship in England at the time, the Hood, also about 45,000 tons, same gunnery systems, a very large battleship as well. Along with the Prince of Wales, they were sent to intercept the Hood, intercept the Bismarck. And as they sailed out into the Straits of Denmark to meet it that morning, um, a huge battle ensued, and but it didn't last very long. Suddenly, a shell from the Bismarck found the after magazine in the Hood, and it sank in 3 minutes. It was one of the fastest sinking of a huge ship in World War II or in any war for that matter. It sank very, very quickly. It blew up and exploded and broke into two pieces. What I want to talk about a little bit is as soon as that ship sank, its escort, the Prince of Wales, a much smaller ship, turned tail and ran. Everything was over. There's no way it could face the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen by itself. It took off and got out of there. Reminds me of the disciples. Luke 23, Jesus had already been in the garden. He was kissed by Judas. The temple guard arrested him. They brought him before a sham court with the Sadducees, and they found some liars. In the end, what they got him on was saying that he would tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Nothing worthy of death. But they couldn't convict Jesus to death. They had to send him to Pilate. And Pilate, in turn, sent him to Herod, and then back to Pilate through this long night. And Pilate, being frustrated, his wife sending him a message, this man's innocent. Pilate, I think, knew this man was innocent, man Jesus. And then picking up Luke 23:13, then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. Nor neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him. Indeed, nothing deserving of death has been done by him, and I will therefore chastise him and release him." And verse 18, and then they all cried out at once, all the people, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, who has been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion and made in the city, and for murder." And then Pilate goes on, verse 22, then he said to him a third time, "Why, what evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go." But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that Jesus be crucified. And the voices of these men and the chief priests prevailed, so that Pilate gave the sentence as it should be requested, and he released to them the one they requested, Barabbas, for whom rebellion and murder had been thrown in prison. And Pilate washed his hands there, it says in another gospel. And a great multitude followed, and Jesus is beaten. We'll kind of zoom through here, and Jesus is beaten, and then eventually he's brought to the hill Golgotha, verse 32, and there was two other criminals led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to a place called Calvary, where they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And they divided his garments and cast lots, fulfilling much of the Old Testament prophecy of the Messiah. And then verse 36, the soldiers also mocking him, coming and offering him sour wine and saying to him, "If you are the King of Kings, save yourself." And an inscription was written over him in letters of the Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, "This is the King of the Jews." And one of the criminals that was hanged blasphemed him, saying, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us." But the other answering rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? and we justly receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said to Jesus, Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Now was the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the earth until the 9th hour, and the sun from noon to 3. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. So when the centurion saw what was happening, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was a righteous man. Or another gospel, certainly this was the Son of God. And the whole crowd came together to the sight, seeing what had been done, beat their breast, and returned. But all his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Verse 50, there was a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and just man. He had not consented to their decision indeed. He was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, where no one was ever lain before. That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. And the women that had come with him from Galilee followed after, and observed the tomb, and how his body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to commandment. The amazing here that Joseph of Arimathea, perhaps Nicodemus, helped him, found Jesus' body and buried it in their own tomb in a hurry. It was amazing time there. There's in the Jewish calendar, there's the Passover and the day of preparation before the Passover, and more than likely that year it would be the day of preparation, the Passover, and then after that the Sabbath. So 3 days they couldn't do anything. So for those 3 days, Jesus' disciples, much like the poor Prince of Wales ship after its battleship, the Hood, its compatriot was sunk, left immediately to get out of there so it wouldn't get sunk as well. The disciples go off away from everything into hiding, and they have to wait 3 days. Even the woman who wanted to put, the spices on Jesus' body, were locked up for 3 days celebrating these feasts. So here they are in their biggest feast of the year, the Passover, and then a regular Sabbath after that, waiting for Sunday, waiting for the day after Passover, the first day of the week, early in the morning, waiting for what was to come. Much like we're waiting through this coronavirus, and some of us are at home trying to lay low at least and stop the spread of it, waiting. How hard is it to wait? And here we are waiting. They waited for days, 3 days. While Jesus was in the tomb, they prepared their spices, but they couldn't put them on. They couldn't do no work during those 3 days. And they waited. Imagine how the disciples felt, how the women felt, wanting to give their hero this burial. Here they come to Jerusalem and been brought in as if Jesus was the Messiah, which he was. And then suddenly he's captured, he's condemned to death, he's crucified. Interestingly, during the crucifixion, the truth was there. Above his head was written, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Little did they know he would save them from their sins. And here they are waiting at the time between his crucifixion. And then the centurion stands up and says, this was a righteous man. This was the Son of God. So the truth was there. But the funny thing is, the disciples and the Pharisees and the leaders there didn't see it, that Jesus was dying for their sins. And then the 3 days of waiting began. Let's remember in our hearts, as we wait through coronavirus, through this weekend, through whatever we have to wait through. We're always waiting, it seems, for something. Let's remember to keep our hearts trained on the sacrifice that Jesus made that day for us.